Welcome to American Education FM, everybody. I'm Dr. Sean Brooks. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. I'm going to start with this one. I think that the timing of the events of last week, the release of, again, a not surprising document, but a horrific document nonetheless, of the UK's rape gang inquiry and the horrific details that exist within that, along with, of course, the remarkably corrupt judicial system in the UK, everything that everybody is seeing regarding Israel. Peace deal gets made, then they start bombing people. They have kill switches in a number of different locations, in a number of different countries. This has been admitted to. Now you have a top Israeli security researcher, either current or former, a Ben Sabti, saying on X, quote, maybe USA needs another Pearl Harbor or 9/11 to remember who is the enemy and who is the friend. Again, that's a perfect way of admitting that you were involved in 9/11 without saying that you were actually involved in 9/11. On top of that, you also have, of course, the Trump administration openly saying that certain meetings aren't going to be taking place because XYZ has happened and they didn't anticipate it, and then all of a sudden, those meetings end up happening. So it's like every single time that some cancellation gets made, it's designed to weed people out, expose individuals, shine a light on endless people, to again continuously let the enemy reveal themselves without a whole lot of effort on the side of the good guys, so to speak. This is the art of war. This is exactly how this gets done on a consistent basis. And again, this is being done to prime the public for a number of different reasons. And it's not just, again, about priming them for a specified destination or an end point necessarily. I mean, we're living through consistent endpoints, which is why we're seeing so much change on such a constant basis. The constant declass of information for the American public and the world public, again, is not accidental. This is all being timed. This is all very specific. And again, there's an order to particular things. You have to release certain documents at certain times, and again, allow the enemies to expose themselves for not covering that information, and at the same time, understanding that the American public and the world public is far more advanced than what the media would ever lead on. Again, if the media is the enemy of the people, which they are, and they're the gatekeeper of information, they're not going to come out the moment that, again, a Tulsi Gabbard drops information about so-called COVID and Anthony Fauci, for example, or the UK rape gang inquiry. Again, regardless of the level of documentation that exists, if everybody's just waiting for the mainstream media to cover it, then those people haven't learned anything. But it's not like things can't be done without a certain segment of the population not understanding what's actually happening. As long as you have enough of the population that understands, then that's good enough. And unfortunately, as I said in a previous episode, that's what creates a great deal of the division that we see. For example, again, that rape gang inquiry in the UK was released at a very specified time, and his name is all throughout that entire document. Again, Keir Starmer was one of the lead prosecutors in those entire cases, and of course, very specifically engaged in their cover-up as well. This was from Politics UK over on X, and they said, breaking, Keir Starmer is officially set to resign as Prime Minister. Several media reports say he'll outline a resignation timetable on Monday after consulting with his wife and family today, unquote. Again, UK Prime Ministers come and go all of the time, and they always seem to leave because they're wrapped up in corruption. With Boris Johnson, it was the COVID parties. With Theresa May before that, it was, well, God knows what. It was probably lots of things. She, of course, was hand-selected and picked for that position, not because she was competent, but because she was controlled. Same thing with Keir Starmer. It doesn't necessarily change anything, and of course, nothing will change unless they actually go after the very enemy that exists within their country, which, as we know, is the Muslim invasion. The more that they're allowed to invade that country by their own government, the worse things are going to get. And again, certainly over there in the UK, a perfect example of that kind of corruption has to do with what happened at one of their zoos recently, where a toddler was thrown into the alligator pit and they refused to release the individual's name who threw the toddler in. It gets worse, believe it or not. This is why the UK continuously outdoes themselves, is that this individual was released on bail. So again, this comes from nexusnewsfeed.com. It says, man who threw UK toddler in a crocodile enclosure released on bail. Despite being suspected of attempted murder, the alleged perpetrator was found unfit for interview, quote unquote, and let go. The police have said that the UK police released a man on bail who allegedly threw a toddler into a zoo crocodile enclosure after he was assessed for not being fit for interview. It says the incident took place at the Johnsons of Oldhurst Zoo in Cambridgeshire on Thursday, where a 3-year-old boy was visiting the crocodile enclosure with his family when the suspect allegedly threw him over the 4-foot fence and into the enclosure, where he fell more than 12 feet and landed among the reptiles. The zoo owner's wife, Tracy Johnson, reportedly leapt in after the child and pulled him out of the enclosure. Quote, she'd always put her life at risk to save someone else. She's an extraordinary lady and very brave. So said the BBC, citing the reptile welfare director, Chris Newman. Toddler was taken to a nearby hospital with serious injuries. Said he was in serious but stable condition, suffered suspected fractures to his arm and pelvis after landing on concrete, and was also attacked by a crocodile. The alleged perpetrator, described as a, quote, 30-year-old man from Norfolk, I don't think so, was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder but later bailed out after being assessed for not being fit for the interview. The man has learning difficulties, quote unquote, they said. Imagine living in a country where you go straight to jail for a tweet, but get bail after being arrested for allegedly throwing a 3-year-old baby into a crocodile enclosure, one ex-user wrote. UK's Labour government has faced accusations of two-tier policing since the 2024 Southport riots, where hundreds were arrested for online posts while criminals were given early release to make room in prisons for the new arrivals. This is again how you demoralize an entire nation. This is exactly why, again, new leadership may not fix the problem. Having a new person at the helm isn't necessarily going to fix the issue here. In fact, it won't. You need action. And it's not just, again, turnover and employment. The corruption in the UK is as bad as it is here and anywhere else. But this right here, too, is part of the exposure. I mean, this is, again, the definition of the Great Awakening that we are living through. That's why, again, a lot of people, myself included, and I'm guilty of it from time to time, too, I think everybody is that you wait for a particular destination. You wait for a major checkpoint. Just like, again, some kind of a racing video game, for example. I remember back in the 80s and 90s, again, playing racing video games, you would hit some kind of a checkpoint and it would lead you to where you knew that you were closer to some end stage. The interesting part is there's really no end stage. It's just constant checkpoints and then the journey between checkpoints. But we want those checkpoints to be big. We want them to be massive. We want them, again, to involve a great deal of information and a lot of disclosure and a lot of D-class and a lot of sunlight where normally, of course, it's been in the dark. That's why people should understand that there's an operation taking place, because all of this is information that was once in the dark. And with, of course, the information age and the way that people communicate today and the different ways that they can communicate, this kind of information cannot stay hidden. Because, again, too many good people learn the truth, and then too many of those people share what it is. And they inform their fellow citizens, of course, and then there becomes so much pressure that somebody at the very top, certainly metaphorically at the bottleneck of a situation where most of the pressure would exist, somebody in politics and somebody, again, within a justice department somewhere in some country would have to actually act on it. Someone would have to stand up and take a stand and do the right thing. And that's happening. Again, there was a time when a lot of these people just could have been blackmailed and bought off and XYZ, but that's just not happening now. And it's been like this, actually, for a very long time. Some people, again, even right now, still aren't awake to the actual disclosures of the information that are taking place on a consistent, if not weekly basis. which again is one hell of a revelation. Again, that's what the Great Awakening is. That's what an apocalypse means. It means a lifting of the veil. So again, it's not that we don't know that certain individuals are criminals and that certain, again, political enterprises, so to speak, have engaged in some of the most horrific things on the face of the planet. But the fact that this is becoming more and more mainstream is forcing individuals, again, in some media circles, certainly some of the larger ones, and many of course, the mid-range and very small ones like this show, is that it's allowing us to have these conversations and expand on these issues a little bit more and try to get individuals to understand that there was a time when this kind of corruption was always hidden. It was never out in the open. Yes, there might be the occasional arrest of a criminal who engaged in a little bit of fraud or stole something or whatever. But people, again, are seeing that this is happening among politicians at the highest levels, which is great. Now, this next one, again, this next little X post, shouldn't surprise anybody, certainly not anybody in this audience, but it has to do with Gavin Newsom. Again, in typical fashion, last week he came out with a video basically, again, blaming Donald Trump for attacking him because he's a political opponent and saying, well, now he's coming after my wife and that's a low blow and he's only doing this because I said that I might run for president in XYZ. There isn't a single thing that's honest about Gavin Newsom. Nothing. His haircut is fake. His face is fake. The words, his behaviors, his mannerisms. I mean, he talks like a complete sociopath. He is completely, if not a psychopath, he's completely removed from reality and remorse and anything else because he's grown up that way. I mean, again, he grew up not just with a silver spoon in his mouth, but he grew up around specified corruption and illegality at the highest levels, which means what are the odds that he would grow up to be an upstanding citizen who would fight back against the machine and the criminal enterprises that exist all around us, let alone within his own family? He wouldn't. He would just be one of them. It's too overwhelming of an environment for him to do anything else other than the only thing that he knows, which is how to be a criminal and be dishonest, while again attempting to make friends. See the difference between, for example, behaviorally and psychologically, I'd say, between a Gavin Newsom and a Hillary Clinton, is Hillary Clinton pretends a little bit less to actually like people. Most people know that Hillary Clinton doesn't get along with people and actually hates them, whereas Gavin Newsom is always trying to get along with certain people. He puts on that fake smile, he starts moving his hands in a real weird way, and then his voice changes and his cadence and his tone changes, and he's always trying to, again, play the victim. I'm one of you. You should like me because I'm one of you. I've always supported you. We've done lots of good things. He's always trying to talk himself into the good things that he thinks he's actually done, when, of course, he hasn't done anything that's worth a damn. Whereas Hillary Clinton is like, well, if you don't like me, too bad. I did good stuff as far as I was concerned, but if you don't like it, I don't care. I mean, she's a little more honest with her illegality and and her unfavorability, we'll call it, as opposed to a Gavin Newsom. But this particular post was from Paul White Gold Eagle over on X, and they said the following here. Again, it shouldn't surprise anybody in this audience because this is exactly who he is. These people steal, and they do it consistently. See, that's also the mind of a criminal. The mind of a criminal is they can have all of the money in the world and still want more. They can get away with 20 things that would put them in prison for the rest of their life, if not the death penalty, but they want that 21st thing. They just can't have enough. So here's what the post said, quote, Kaiser Permanente and PG&E allegedly funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars to Jennifer Siebel Newsom's nonprofit, Gavin Newsom's wife, while securing hundreds of millions in state payments and contracts. Quid pro quo. That's it. It's that simple. Happens all of the time. And according to Open the Books, quote, Newsom reaped $10.6 million in campaign cash from 979 state vendors who pocketed $6.2 billion as of 2022, unquote. The Representation Project, founded by Jennifer, Newsom's wife, In 2011, as a gender nonprofit, received the donations during Gavin Newsom's rise from lieutenant governor to governor. The nonprofit has paid Siebel Newsom more than $3.7 million, including $2.3 million in salary, from 2011 through 2018, and routed additional funds to her for-profit production company, Girls Club Entertainment, for film work. Again, at face value, she seems like she's wrapped up in both pedophilia and human trafficking, and why wouldn't she be? A, she's Jewish. B, she's a former actress, allegedly, and a documentary filmmaker. She checks all the boxes of anybody in the state of California who's wrapped up in those kinds of businesses receiving that kind of money with that kind of a background. It says Kaiser then received $172.2 million from the state. Influence Watch documented Kaiser securing business from state contracts during the Newsom administration, including a $500 million no-bid contract for a pandemic field hospital and later controversial Medi-Cal managed care arrangements. PG&E donated $358,000 to the Representation Project between 2011 and 2018, according to IRS Form 990 filings. Earlier, PG&E served as associate producer on Siebel Newsom's film Misrepresentation, quote-unquote, and in association with On the Mask You Live In, quote-unquote. PG&E received, again, no one's ever heard any of these documentaries, so to speak. It goes on, it says PG&E received $323,777,292 in state payments in fiscal year of 2021 alone, according to a review of state vendor data by Open the Books. PG&E's San Francisco-based leadership had a representative on the nonprofit's board in 2017. The utility declared bankruptcy in January of 2019 during massive wildfire liabilities, including the deadly 2018 Camp Fire that killed 85 people. Newsom signed AB 1054 in 2019, creating a $21 billion wildfire fund backed by ratepayers and taxpayers that provided relief to PG&E. Donations happened from 2011 through 2019, with spikes around Newsom's 2015 gubernatorial announcement and 2018 election. Now the Department of Justice is investigating Siebel Newsom's taxes and nonprofits tied to her and the governor, based on whistleblower complaints to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Sacramento from 2021 and 2024 through 2025, investigations that were started during the Biden administration, unquote. Again, you could get these people for murder, but if tax evasion and improper campaign funds is how you take them down, then so be it. The thing to keep in mind, too, is that if grand juries are summoned, which I believe they have been in the case of the Newsoms, that if the public is told that it's just financial, a grand jury can see whatever evidence can be brought to bear there regarding both of them. Any of their illegal behavior doesn't just have to be financial. It can be anything. Illegal communications, again, human trafficking, murder, you name it. It could be all of it. So again, it's not like Gavin Newsom's going to come out and say, well, we've been accused of murder and human trafficking and pedophilia and XYZ. He's not going to say that. They're going to keep it around money. Because if it's around money, then it sounds like it's just paperwork, basically. Maybe it was a clerical error. They'll chalk it up to something like that. But you don't convene a grand jury based on a clerical error. It's too specific and it's too heavy. So again, this is one of the things that a lot of people, again, are basically saying, and I fully understand it. They're saying, hey, look, what about an arrest then? The thing that people have to keep in mind, and I have to remind myself of this too, is that it's these kinds of disclosures that would never be happening in the first place if there wasn't real movement in a positive direction. I don't think that we're just being thrown a bone here to sort of wet our whistle a little bit. I think that this is the constant disclosure. And again, people are seeing the panic, and they're hearing the panic in their voices. And this is, again, normally something that would remain in the dark, but it isn't. It's out in the light, and it's forcing these individuals to find a camera and a microphone and respond to it, which I find highly entertaining. Now that leads me to this, and this is a rather long read. And I want to apologize in advance for, again, reading so much here over the show as of late. But there's a lot of thought-provoking stuff, as we all know, that's out there. And this, again, is interesting, and it's one of the things I think that is also highlighting some of the division among the populace that exists, regardless of the country where we live. Is, again, while you have a lot of different voices out there and a lot of different people shouting about all of the corruption, that everybody is waiting again for massive arrests of people that we know already to be absolutely guilty, keeping in mind the flip side of that coin, which is a great deal of the population has no idea that endless individuals are guilty of the most heinous crimes known to man. While keeping in mind here that it's these constant disclosures over, of course, the last, 10 plus years? At least 10 plus years? And the shift in our culture and I would call it the de-wussification of our society, where a lot of people, again, went from saying, for example, I'm just going to use this as a quick, funny example, but it's true. People went from actually saying the R word, literally saying that. Well, they're the R word. Or someone would say, don't say the R word. To now, everybody's saying retarded on a constant basis because they should. Because that shift from saying, well, don't say it, it's the R word, and that's disrespectful. When someone does something like that, that's social engineering. And social engineering is designed to pacify people, thereby being able to demoralize them easier, and then ultimately subvert their entire way of thinking and their individuality, and then you can rule over them. Think of how much and how long that's been happening, certainly before 2016. And then more and more people start to see particular things in society, and they say, well, wait a minute. I don't have to put up with this. I know that this is wrong. I know that this isn't helping anything because my general surroundings aren't improving. I've again said it about the school business. People who work within the school business never stop to think for a minute, wait a minute, why is everything getting worse? Why are things not only remaining stagnant, but why are things getting worse? And then they always say something stupid like, well, our school did better than another school, or we have the best school in this area as opposed to someone else. That's not the point. Those useless destination, whatever they are, occurrences are a flash in the pan compared to the larger journey in the larger picture. And unfortunately, again, that journey was taking people toward total degradation. And again, look where it's led. You have endless illegality in places where illegality should never exist. And now, in many cases, that illegality is supported, covered up, perpetuated, rationalized, and a number of other things that are all horrible. But those behaviors now are out in the open. Those behaviors, again, are being brought to light where normally they would have been hidden in the dark, and the enemy doesn't know how to respond to any of this, which is fantastic. But this, too, again, is one of the things that we had to be prepped for. We had to wake ourselves up to this also. And as I've said before, right before I read this here, the Great Awakening has to do with us speaking to God and God speaking to us by bypassing authority figures and understanding that a man or a woman in a position of so-called authority, quote unquote, who is of flesh and blood just like we are, is not the person that we should be listening to. We should be listening to Jesus, of course, and then ourselves. And that's about it. But you can see in society all of the different people who are constantly looking to their left or their right or the people around them to basically say, is this thought that I just had okay? That's not the approach to take. But again, the American public had to be primed for this, and the world public had to be primed for this. And we've been primed for this for quite some time, because everybody, again, has a breaking point. As I've said, and as you know, when you wake up to particular things, you don't fall back asleep. You start to recognize more patterns, and then that never stops. So here's the post. And again, it's lengthy, my apologies, but it's thought-provoking. And you can start to see this, of course, throughout the last number of years. And you can see where this is potentially going also. This was from Observing Consciousness. It was, again, a long post of theirs. And it was titled, "Things Have Been Happening. You Were Waiting for the Wrong Kind of Proof. The Awakening Came Through Integration." They said, quote, this was back on June 18th. Quote, "For years I have heard the same questions moving through this movement. When are the arrests coming? When will the truth finally come out? Where are the indictments? When does the military step in? When will they expose all of it? What date is everything supposed to happen? Why does it still feel like nothing is happening?" Those questions came from a real place because people could feel the distortion long before they could fully describe the structure creating it. They watched corruption spread through government, media, finance, healthcare, technology, education, and law, while the visible response always seemed smaller than the machinery being exposed. The crimes appeared enormous, the accountability appeared fragmented, and the gap between them produced a growing belief that history remained frozen. People began waiting for one defining moment, large enough to close that gap, to, quote, bring closure, quote unquote, I have heard people say. They imagined a mass arrest, an emergency broadcast, a monumental disclosure, or some undeniable event where every hidden relationship would be revealed at once and the entire country would finally understand what had happened. That expectation became the blind spot. The longer people waited for the spectacular reveal, the less capable they became of recognizing the structural movement already unfolding around them. Their attention narrowed around one imagined outcome, and anything arriving in another form was dismissed as delay, distraction, or theater. Again, just a side note, that right there is where the entire Great Awakening lost a great deal of people. Because once people would learn about the horrific crimes in their own minds, they would openly say, well, why haven't these people been arrested? It's obvious. Well, the fact is that you have to have more people in the public become aware of what is obvious to some. They went on and they said a Supreme Court ruling felt too technical to matter. A semiconductor facility rising in the desert looked like ordinary business news. A platform reversing a censorship policy seemed cosmetic. Restrictions on advanced technology sounded like another trade dispute. Expanding energy production appeared disconnected from artificial intelligence. A defense contract looked like another weapon program. A fraud indictment involving one nonprofit, contractor, or medical supplier looked like another isolated criminal case. Every occurrence was judged by whether it felt dramatic enough. When the event did not resemble the ending people had imagined, they struggled to recognize it as part of the transformation already underway. That is how myopic thinking constricts awareness. The mind becomes fixed upon one future event and begins filtering out the evidence moving through the present. Progress disappears from perception unless it arrives in the exact form people were conditioned to expect. Spectacle becomes the measuring stick while the architecture determining the future continues moving beneath it. That was the great perpetual trap of the last 4 years. People were waiting for history to announce itself while history was passing through courts, contracts, capital flows, energy systems, supply chains, intelligence networks, technology platforms, and financial investigations. Side note, I'll give you a quick example. This is where the Great Awakening lost a lot of people, was the fake inauguration of Joe Biden in 2021. That day was a monumental shift with a lot of people where, again, they had expectations, albeit false, and no one told them that anything was going to happen that day. But they actually believed that mass arrests would happen that day of the people that we knew had engaged in voter fraud, and this would be the perfect time to do it. But for anybody who really remembers that day, what you also saw was something that was way more dramatic than a bunch of people being arrested. you saw copious amounts of anomalies taking place. People doing things they shouldn't have been doing, people standing where they shouldn't have stood. I mean, it was just beyond bizarre. The whole day was beyond bizarre. The mask wearing, of course, the distancing, all of it. It was beyond odd. But that was because it had to be. People had to see it that way. They go on. They said the old system benefited from that fixation because it had trained the public to recognize emotional events while overlooking structural change. Events capture attention for a moment. Architecture determines what remains possible for generations. A system this large could only be exposed and transformed through sequence. Its legal protections had to weaken while its information monopoly fractured. Its financial pathways had to become traceable while its foreign dependencies were reduced. Its institutions had to lose their automatic authority while new infrastructure rose underneath them. The replacements had to become functional before the public could fully understand why they were needed. This is what has been happening. The information control system began losing its greatest protection when the relationships connecting government, technology platforms, fact-checking organizations, quote unquote, and media institutions moved into public view. Again, it was all in the dark, and then it all came out into the light. All of the censorship was normally in the dark, and people didn't recognize it. And now, of course, everybody can see it for what it is. And, of course, COVID and the fraudulent 2020 election and 1,000 other things have proven that. They went on, it says, for years, censorship was presented as private platform moderation carried out independently by corporations trying to protect users from dangerous information. Then the communications began surfacing, and the handoff became easier to see. Government officials had pressed technology companies over medical claims, election stories, political narratives, satire, and information they considered dangerous. That pressure entered corporate policy. Corporate policy entered algorithmic enforcement. Outside organizations reinforced the restrictions, and media outlets cited those same enforcement systems as evidence that the original information lacked credibility. Let me give you a quick example. Again, another little side note here. I'll never forget, and I think it was back in 2014 or 2015. There was some kind of a shooting. Could have been fake, not sure. Don't know if it was Parkland or it wasn't. Could have been Parkland. Again, staged. I fully understand that, among other things. But every late night talk show host, again, Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, Conan O'Brien, it was even David Letterman if he was still doing it. It was all of them on a script, which they were reading, all of them in their monologues. They all said the same phrase when it came to AR-15s. They all called them weapons of war. All of them. And I'll never forget that because I remember saying to myself, they're all saying the exact same thing. That's a script. They all work for different stations, but it's the same conglomerate. It's the same criminal enterprise. And they're given, again, it's not comedy, which is what it was supposed to be. It's what those shows were supposed to be. But they were given a script about a political event and something, again, that they wanted to perpetuate among the public, regardless of who their audience was. If they all had differing audiences, which typically they did, if anybody watched them at all, it didn't matter. They wanted everybody to believe that a rifle was a so-called weapon of war. And then that phrase, if you recall, became mainstream. Every politician started saying it if they hadn't already. Why do we have these weapons of war? These weapons of war, these weapons of war. That's social engineering 101. But that's also mind control. And that was part of the plan back then. But again, as more people were waking up to it, now look what's happened with late night television. It's disintegrated. It's non-existent. No one cares. Because they see it for what it really is. The only people still watching it are people who are still addicted to the Matrix. They're still locked in. It goes on here. It says each layer appeared separate until the connections became visible. Technology executives eventually acknowledged government pressure. Major reporting was acknowledged to have been demoted following warnings from federal authorities. Centralized fact-checking models began losing legitimacy as the public recognized that many of the institutions claiming to determine truth were operating inside the same ideological and financial ecosystem. Independent researchers, citizen journalists, and long-form writers began moving information faster than the old gatekeepers could contain it. It says the information gate continued operating, though its invisibility had been damaged. People started looking beyond the headlines and asking who defined the narrative, who enforced it, who funded the institutions involved, and who benefited from the resulting public perception. That shift represented more than media awareness. It marked the recovery of discernment. The awakening began when people stopped accepting the story at the surface and began tracing how the story had been constructed. While the information architecture was becoming visible, the administrative state was also losing part of the closed loop through which it had accumulated enormous authority. The movement passed quietly through the courts because the cases appeared procedural. They involved agencies, statutes, jurisdiction, jury rights, and constitutional limits, subjects that rarely generate the emotional intensity required to dominate the news cycle. Their cumulative meaning reached much deeper. Federal agencies had gradually acquired the power to shape rules, interpret those rules, investigate alleged violations, prosecute targets, and adjudicate disputes inside administrative structures they largely controlled. That concentration of power became normal because it developed slowly and remained hidden behind technical language. The Supreme Court began interpreting that pattern. Agencies claiming sweeping authority were required to demonstrate clearer authorization from Congress. Courts regained responsibility for interpreting ambiguous laws instead of automatically deferring to the agencies enforcing them. Jury rights were strengthened in cases involving civil penalties. The older regulatory structures became more open to challenge when newly injured parties entered the field. No single ruling transformed the entire administrative state, yet the sequence changed the environment in which that state could operate. Congress was being pushed back toward its responsibility to write clear laws, courts toward their responsibility to interpret them, juries toward their constitutional role, and agencies toward the boundaries of the authority they had actually received. The deeper movement occurred inside public perception. Institutions that had been presented as permanent, expert, and untouchable began appearing contestable. Their machinery continued operating while their presumed immunity began weakening. Think of the education system. At the same time, globalization was reorganizing around sovereignty. For decades, manufacturing had been sent overseas, medical production had been concentrated in foreign supply chains, energy dependence had expanded, and strategic industries had been placed inside rival nations because efficiency had been elevated above national resilience. Then dependency revealed its true cost. The pandemic, quote unquote, there was no pandemic, exposed the fragility of medical and industrial supply chains. The war in Ukraine exposed the consequences of energy dependence. Semiconductor shortages revealed that much of the modern economy relied upon a small number of advanced fabrication facilities located far from the nations depending upon them. The underlying reality became impossible to ignore. A nation remains operational only while it can access the energy, materials, technology, and productive capacity required to sustain itself. The United States began restricting China's access to advanced semiconductors and chip manufacturing equipment while expanding incentives for domestic production. Artificial intelligence, critical minerals, shipping routes, satellite systems, data centers, and energy infrastructure began moving from ordinary economic categories into the realm of national security. BRICS, expanded at the same time, giving more nations the ability to pursue financial trade and development relationships outside the traditional Western framework. The world began separating into overlapping systems of access where technology, payments, energy, shipping, satellites, and defense could be controlled according to strategic alignment. The central question changed. Nations began asking what they needed to control in order to remain operational when another nation closed the gate. That question reorganized the entire global environment. Resilience moved ahead of efficiency. Strategic redundancy replaced blind dependence. Sovereignty returned as an operating requirement grounded in production, energy, technology, and secure access. That shift helps explain why America began rebuilding its physical foundation, while public attention remained focused on elections, inflation, and social conflict. Capital moved into semiconductor facilities, battery plants, chemical production, electronics, transportation, manufacturing, and advanced industrial systems. Data centers began rising across the country as the artificial intelligence build-out accelerated. Grid capacity, power generation, pipelines, ports, and natural gas exports moved closer to the center of national strategy. These projects appeared separate because they were announced by different companies in different states under different economic categories. Together, they formed the physical layer of a new national operating environment. Artificial intelligence requires enormous electrical capacity. Defense requires secure materials, advanced chips, and domestic factories. Hospitals require resilient medical supply networks. Transportation requires software, energy, and reliable production. National independence requires the ability to sustain all these systems without asking a strategic competitor for continued access. Energy runs beneath the entire architecture because every digital system rests upon a physical system, and every physical system depends upon power. The factory, the data center, the defense plant, the hospital, the port, and the transportation network all draw life from the same underlying foundation. Energy, manufacturing, technology, and defense were never truly separate domains. They form one sovereignty architecture, whose ultimate product is national capacity. That capacity has to be restructured before the emerging system could scale. The same integration became visible inside defense, where the warfare became moving beyond isolated platforms and into living intelligence networks. The public still imagines military power through bombers, aircraft carriers, tanks, missiles, and soldiers. Those platforms remain central, yet their effectiveness increasingly depends upon the invisible architecture connecting them. Satellites observe the field while sensors collect signals from the ground, air, sea, and electromagnetic environment. Data platforms combine those inputs into one operating picture. Artificial intelligence identifies patterns, prioritizes threats, and compresses the time required to understand what is happening. Commanders receive a clearer field of awareness while autonomous systems move toward the edge, carry out defined missions, and return new information to the network. The weapon gains meaning through the system surrounding it. Commercial satellite networks, artificial intelligence platforms, autonomous vehicles, data integration companies, and traditional military infrastructure began converging into the architecture I have described through the Genesis stack. The satellite layer sees, the communication layer carries, the data layer integrates, artificial intelligence interprets, command decides, and the autonomous edge acts, with each completed action creating new information that strengthens the next decision. This architecture extends far beyond the battlefield because the same model can observe borders, ports, shipping lanes, hospitals, supply chains, energy corridors, and disaster zones. Environments that once appeared as disconnected incidents can now be modeled as living systems whose movements, pressures, and vulnerabilities become visible through integration. That changes the nature of power because it changes the nature of sight. Patterns hidden inside distance, bureaucracy, and fragmentation begin coming into focus once the systems capable of holding the whole picture are connected. that same capacity began transforming the exposure of fraud. For decades, fraud was presented as a collection of unrelated crimes committed by individual bad actors. One contractor stole money from a program. One nonprofit diverted funds. One medical supplier submitted false claims. One shell company moved money. And one public official abused authority. It says then another case emerged in another state, another department, or another government program, and the public was encouraged to see no relationship between them. Fragmentation protected the larger structure. Over the last 4 years, investigations began moving through individual actors and into infrastructure connecting them. Pandemic relief cases exposed thousands of defendants and billions in alleged losses. Healthcare investigations expanded through telemedicine companies, medical suppliers, building operations, data brokers, foreign actors, shell entities, and payment processors. Money laundering, procurement abuse, identity theft, wire fraud, and nonprofit diversion began appearing as repeating operational patterns. The scandal was becoming architecture, and the architecture was becoming searchable. Government creates a funding stream, agencies distribute the money, contractors and nonprofit organizations create layers of separation, shell entities and professional intermediaries move the funds, billing systems convert paperwork into payment, political relationships protect the program, and fragmented media coverage keeps public attention fixed on one defendant at a time. The real system lives inside the handoffs. Modern data platforms are beginning to reveal those handoffs by connecting names to organizations, organizations to grants, grants to contracts, contracts to invoices, invoices to transfers, and transfers to property, political donations, family relationships, and foreign accounts. Once the chain becomes visible, fraud stops looking random and begins appearing as a living system. That is the fraud industrial complex. It was always larger than one contractor, one nonprofit, one stolen identity, or one fraudulent claim. The deeper change is that the architecture can increasingly be observed, compared, and mapped at scale. These shifts were rooted in separate stories, because separation is how the old perpetual system preserved itself. The information controlling system became visible, while the authority of administrative agencies was being narrowed. Global supply chains fractured while America rebuilt its manufacturing and energy capacity. Artificial intelligence expanded while defense systems became integrated sensing networks. Fraud investigations grew larger while data platforms became capable of tracing institutions, money flows, and relationships across previously isolated domains. Every layer belonged to the same complex adaptive system. Law shaped the boundaries while finance carried the incentives. Energy powered the physical layer while technology connected the field. Media shaped public perception while neuro-linguistic framing guided attention, emotion, and interpretation. Geopolitics moved resources and alliances while military systems compressed the distance between observation and action. Consciousness determined whether the individual could perceive these relationships without becoming trapped inside the emotional theater surrounding them. Faith held the center, because this transformation was never only political, technological, or institutional. It was perpetual and spiritual. People had to recover the ability to hold multiple layers of reality at the same time. They had to learn to see the public event alongside the hidden incentive, the institutional relationship, the psychological frame, and the deeper meaning moving through the same moment. That kind of sight develops through repeated contact with the pattern. Every time someone asked, "When will it happen?" quote unquote, they revealed how deeply the old frame still held. The question placed truth somewhere in the future and handed authority back to an external event. It assumed history had not begun because the anticipated spectacle had not appeared. Yet the question itself became an indicator that the sequence was unfolding at the right speed. Every new date people circled, every prediction that passed, and every demand for the next reveal showed that the process had not outrun the collective capacity to absorb it. A transformation moving too quickly would trigger psychological rejection, social panic, and a retreat into familiar explanations. A transformation moving too slowly would dissolve back into background noise before enough people could connect the pattern. The pace had to remain inside the narrow space where pressure could break the old frame, while time remained for people to build a more coherent understanding of the world around them. The legal structure had to move while the public learned why agency power mattered. The information system had to expose itself while people rebuilt discernment. The industrial base had to return before global supply chains fully fractured. The energy layer had to strengthen before artificial intelligence and advanced manufacturing could scale. The data architecture had to mature before fraud networks could be traced across agencies, borders, and financial rails. The consciousness shift had to move with all of it because human beings had to become capable of seeing the pattern they were being asked to hold. Sequence mattered because every layer perpetuated the conditions for the next. Pacing mattered because the nervous system requires time to integrate reality when its previous worldview begins collapsing. Human understanding mattered because a population can only participate in transformation when it possesses enough awareness to recognize what is changing. Only a small percentage could see the meta pattern early enough to understand that the absence of spectacle never meant the absence of movement. They were not handed a complete picture. They learned to recognize recurring geometry across domains. They saw the same structures appearing through courts, media, finance, war, healthcare, technology, energy, and consciousness, then translated those relationships into language others could begin to hold. That became the work. The early pattern seers were meant to connect the court ruling to the agency structure to the funding stream to the contractor, corporation, or nonprofit, and the political network to the media frame shaping public emotion. I would go so far as to say the secret society, the cabal, if you were, the satanic individuals, again, controlling a great deal of things, and then their underlings below them. It goes on, it says they were meant to see energy, manufacturing, artificial intelligence, satellite networks, and autonomous systems as one emerging sovereignty architecture. They were meant to recognize geopolitical realignment as part of the weakening of the old financial order, then connect the external restructuring to the internal awakening required to perceive it. They were never meant to stand above everyone else. They were meant to come up from underneath, help others orient, give language to what people were already sensing, and hold coherence while the larger field caught up. That is what this was always about. It was about learning how to see, then helping others see without overwhelming them. It was about carrying enough of the pattern to create a bridge between confusion and recognition, allowing one person to understand the structure well enough to help the next person understand it, who could help the next. The repeated question, quote, "When will it happen?" unquote, was never evidence that nothing was happening. It was evidence that the unfolding had not yet outrun the human capacity to absorb it. The fact that people still ask means the process is still moving through the collective nervous system. The old frame continues weakening while the new one continues forming. More people are tracing the handoffs, following the incentives and recognizing the relationships between law, information, energy, technology, finance, war, health, faith, and consciousness. The awakening is spreading through integration. A small percentage begins seeing the meta pattern first, holding the signal through the noise, and helping the next group recognize what had already been unfolding around them. The group had begun helping the next, widening the field of awareness until the question itself started changing. People once asked when something would finally happen. They were beginning to ask how they missed how much was already happening. That is the moment the spell breaks, because the observer begins becoming a participant, and the scattered events become a living map. Things have been happening. The timing was never waiting on the date. The timing was waiting on us." Unquote. Again, this is the point of, I think, why I've been given the opportunity to have this show, albeit a small one, but it's a piece of the bridge, regardless of the size. It could be a washer on a bolt. It could be that size of a show compared to other shows. But the washer on that bolt is a part of the bridge. And that's humbling, and that's important, because that bridge has to be generational. You have to have individuals piece things together for other people so that, again, they can start to see things differently as well, because people pieced things together for me. That's why I'm here. That's the point. And you gain all of this information, and it's overwhelming. And you start to learn exactly why things are the way that they are. And that's a gift from God, without a doubt. And unplugging from the matrix to see things as they've actually been designed. And then you have no choice but to tell people about it. Again, different decisions get made. You start to wrestle with whether or not you should write something or you should say something or whatever, and then before you know it, you say you have nothing to lose. And as we all know, that's a dangerous individual in a very good way. So I agree, again, with a great deal of that. We're all a piece of this all together, but things have to move at a particular pace because that's how you build the bridge. That's how you build a knowledge base. And then ultimately, when certain things actually transpire and people, again, lose their positions or they're removed or somebody's prosecuted, an arrest is an inevitability. And that's certainly going to happen in the future without a doubt. Someone will be held accountable for what they've done. And then once that becomes the norm, then that becomes the norm with other people. And then you have a massive consciousness shift, because then you see exactly what these people have done. Even the blind will be forced to see it. Even the people who don't willfully participate or pay attention to what's going on because they surround themselves with, I don't know, things of this world that distract them, it's an inevitability that even they will wake up to it. And the harsh part is that they might find out that they've been a part of the problem, that they have been a part of the manipulative system this entire time, that they have been a part of the destruction of their own fellow citizens, again, without their knowledge, without their conscious participation. And that's going to be very difficult for a great deal of people because that's already happening. That's why you see people abandoning certain lines of work and certain systems. Case in point, the education system. I just have one story here that I want to break down for you, but this again exemplifies the entire system and then the reaction to that system. Because as I've said before, when there are heinous crimes that take place, there should only be one response. And it's a complete removal from that system. Your lack of participation is what makes it crumble to the ground, rather, and makes it cease to exist. Whether that happens in this case is anybody's guess, but I guarantee that someone, maybe not even the direct victim in this particular case, but I bet someone ended up leaving the system as a result. This has to do with an incident that occurred this year in Clarksville, Tennessee, involving the Montgomery Central High School in Clarksville, Montgomery County school system. And here's the grok breakdown of this. And I had a piece of audio that I threw in the last war video about it, but I just want to read this because this is a little more descriptive. It says, the high school student at the center is Mackenzie Ellenthorpe, 17 at the time of the incident, and she turned 18 later. Her science teacher was Matthew Gay Vetter, age 52, who had worked for the district since August of 2020, with no prior complaints or disciplinary actions on file. Vetter was married to the district's director of schools, the superintendent, Dr. Jean Luna Vetter. Again, out of the gate, you have nepotism. Why is it that you have a superintendent who is the boss of her husband? This should never be the case. You should never have such a thing. But school districts have this all of the time. The incident in question was on March 9th of 2026. During class at Montgomery Central High School, Vetter allegedly showed Mackenzie nude photos of himself on his personal cell phone. According to Mackenzie's account, the child, the minor, the student, of course, of this particular individual, shared in interviews at a public school board meeting that she was talking with her teacher, possibly about schoolwork. He was holding his phone, scrolled to a nude photo of himself, and left it visible on the screen. He then scrolled further, revealing additional images described as one photo initially, followed by 2 rows of nude photos. Estimates and reports mention around 6 to 8 images total. He did not react with shock, quickly hide the phone, apologize, or say anything like, "I'm sorry, you weren't supposed to see that." The images stayed visible long enough for her to see them clearly. She found it shocking and disturbing, especially as a senior in her final year of high school. She later said the incident changed, quote-unquote, her life, and that she no longer felt safe in a place where she was supposed to feel protected. She described it as taking away part of her senior year. Well, that's the least of it, but okay. It says the school district's account was that the inappropriate photo was shown accidentally and only briefly, while Vetter was showing an inappropriate image to a student on his phone in class. Vetter's position, per law enforcement reports, he admits to investigators with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office that he showed nude photos of himself to the student, but maintained that it was accidental. This, of course, is a crime. And his wife is the superintendent. Keep that in mind as I continue reading here. The immediate aftermath is the incident was reported promptly. Dr. Jean Luna Vetter, the superintendent and Vetter's wife, reported it and recused herself from any involvement in the investigation or disciplinary process. Vetter was immediately reassigned to an alternative work site off school property pending investigations. He resigned on April 9th of 2026, about a month after the incident. As a tenured teacher, resignation meant he waived certain due process rights. Says the district noted that even the accidental display of inappropriate conduct could warrant discipline up to termination. You know what else it should warrant is a Title IX investigation. Now, fortunately, in this particular case regarding, again, the minor student told everybody immediately. She immediately went home, told her parents did the right thing, blew everything up, took it to the police, took it to the school district, filed the criminal charges. I mean, they did the whole thing out of the gate, which is exactly what you should do in moments like this. Doesn't matter if their daughter or child is a senior or not, almost ready to graduate or not. Doesn't matter the grade. That's what should happen right out of the gate. Of course, he ended up resigning, which is fine. But as far as the criminal investigation is concerned, it was handled by, or is being handled by, the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. The case was later reassigned to prosecutors in Sumner County, 18th Judicial District Attorney General's Office, after the local DA's office recused or was reassigned. As of mid-June 2026, the investigation was ongoing, reviewed by the DA's office with no charges filed yet. The DA hopes to reach a decision on possible prosecution soon. This is open and closed. This is an easy case to prosecute. He admitted it. Doesn't matter if it was accidental or not. And it clearly wasn't based on his reaction, and the fact that she was a senior set to graduate and almost turn 18. Again, it's sexual coercion. That's exactly what this is. It's intimidation. He's grooming her. Those are all crimes. School district side said that the district submitted an initial report to the Tennessee State Board of Education and planned a final report after external investigations were concluded. Internal disciplinary processes were delayed pending the criminal investigation. The district emphasized due process and cooperation with law enforcement. The only reason that happened was because the parents responded promptly, because the minor responded promptly. The district would have covered it up. His wife was the superintendent. It says the family has pushed for full criminal prosecution to the fullest extent that Tennessee law will allow, quote unquote, calling resignation insufficient. They have expressed frustration with what they see as a lack of transparency and accountability. Public statement and school board meeting on June 17th of 2026. 3 months after the incident, Mackenzie Ellithorpe addressed the Clarksville-Montgomery County School Board publicly for the first time. She identified herself as the student who was shown the nude photos of Superintendent Dr. Jean Luna Vedder's husband, Matthew Vedder, quote unquote. She stated that the district and leaders had been trying to silence her and her family, and she no longer felt safe, and that you failed us, quote unquote. She emphasized the need for accountability, doing what is right, and change. She described the emotional impact on her senior year. Her father, Adam Ellithorpe, also spoke, noting that questions had been raised, but answers were hard to find, and that the resignation was only the first step. Her mother, Ashley Ellithorpe, said the board had failed Mackenzie and so many other innocent children, quote unquote. The family believes Vedder may have targeted others, and additional people reportedly came forward after the story became public. Uh-oh. The meeting grew tense with community support for the family. That's interesting. Didn't happen in the town where I live. A few people supported the mother regarding the MERS case and the child, but many, including school employees, with no knowledge whatsoever of the incident, came to the defense of the alleged abuser and assaulter. Isn't that strange? One man was removed after making a disruptive comment directed at the superintendent, referencing her husband's victim. The board later passed a measure shortening public comment time, and therein lies the corruption that everybody can see. A horrific case gets brought to light, and what does the school board do? They shorten the public comment time. Again, those are the actions of a criminal organization, not the actions of a transparent agency, so to speak, that works on behalf of the public for the safety and security of everybody involved. It wraps up here. It says parents and community members have demanded more transparency from the district. Some have described the alleged actions as predatory, you think? The case has drawn significant local media coverage and public attention due to the teacher's connections to the superintendent and the conflicting accounts of whether the exposure was truly accidental. As of the latest reports around mid to late June of 2026, Vedder remains resigned, the criminal investigation continues with the DA reviewing evidence, and the family continues to advocate for stronger accountability and potential charges. No final resolution, on charges or further district actions has been publicly announced at the time, unquote. So the teacher has resigned, but his wife, the superintendent, has not, remains in her position, just again, deferred involvement. This again is exactly how corrupt these boards are. They would keep a superintendent like that. I understand that the actions of one don't necessarily define the actions of the other. However, when you work for the public as elected officials, and you're a taxpayer-funded entity, like a school district, if one family member is guilty of something, the other one typically goes down. Again, the sheer embarrassment of being associated with the guilty party in this case, and again, he's guilty, is that they're so addicted to the money and the position that they'll probably still stick around. And this right here is the sociopathology that is out in the open for everybody to see, not to mention the actions of the board themselves. This again used to be a behavior that was hidden. It used to be a behavior that school districts worked very hard to hide and could actually get away with it. But they can't get away with it now. The consciousness on the entire school system in America, the entire indoctrination criminal enterprise of what it is out in the open. The only logical solution now is for those who can see it to walk away from it and stop attending it. Again, everybody very quickly will rationalize their involvement. they'll say, well, I don't know anything else. Or they'll say, well, that'll never happen to my kid. And the list of excuses is endless. But again, that association continues to fuel the organization. So stop associating, and then they have no fuel, and then they'll cease to exist. And people will have to find something else to do with their time. Heaven forbid, teach themselves. This is the Great Awakening. But it's out in the open. They have their excuses as to why, of course, we report on this and why we bring these stories to bear. They always say, well, there are some people that just want to take down these school systems and they just want to tear us down while we're always trying to build ourselves up. You're not building up anything. You have a bad product. You have bad people. You have zero return on investment as an organization, regardless of the American school district, zero return on investment. And that's the end of it. And then you again have criminal behavior, cover-ups, illegality, sexual grooming, predatory behavior toward minors and one another as co-workers. The list is endless. The scales are completely outweighed. One of them is loaded with illegality, and the other one barely has literacy, and I would go so far as to say it has zero literacy. But again, this is the shift in consciousness. This is on purpose. We are seeing this. We are being shown this. And then, of course, we are bridging that communication about what is really going on within this business. The only people who don't want to walk across this bridge are the ones who are going to drown in the waters below it. I'm fine with that. You can only swim so long before your entire muscles give way, metaphorically, and then you'll sink to the bottom. Again, I'm not going to cry over spilled milk on that. If they want to go down with the ship, be my guest. Case in point, Tulsi Gabbard, the ODNI, former ODNI, or DNI rather, and the Fauci debate that's been going on regarding all of this information. The press release and the information that was released regarding COVID here is filled with truths, half-truths, and some ambiguity. But I'll summarize it quickly and say this. We know that COVID doesn't exist. This is the next leap, though. This is the next, again, it's the next beam in the bridge, is that COVID and viruses, quote unquote, don't exist. There are only manufactured injections. That this was not something, again, that was a virus lab leak, quote unquote, in the sense that it flew out of a window and then happened to go into the mouth of a Chinaman and then made its way onto an airplane where they coughed and sneezed on people in XYZ. This is the bridge that is being built toward the truth of contagion for the public who isn't caught up yet on the truth of contagion. Contagion, again, is electromagnetic from person to person because we're electric beings, and that's how we, again, that's how the cells rather in our body shift and change and make a person ill. But to do that quicker, which is gain of function, you inject people with something that is contagious just from proximity. Again, not through coughing and sneezing. But if you can do it through touch and physical proximity, then you've got something. Then you have a real poison on your hands. And again, what was disclosed by Tulsi Gabbard was that Anthony Fauci was directly involved in gain of function in all of this and lied to Congress. Now, of course, everybody, like usual, is calling for the arrest and hanging of Anthony Fauci, and rightfully so. And the fact that the media isn't reporting on any of this, certainly not to any length, if at all, which they're not, that proves that they were directly involved in it, because back in 2020 and every year before, they've been involved in the medical industrial complex, and this is now well known. Everybody can see this. So much so that some moron sitting on a couch on some morning show somewhere on some news station, when they were normally advocating for vaccination, is now keeping their mouth shut. That's because humble pie chokes in the throats of people who don't know what the hell they're talking about, because the only test that matters is the test of time. And those of us, again, who are out there screaming at the top of our lungs on our soapboxes about why people should not be doing this and should not be falling for the peer pressure and the pressure to, again, inject themselves with an unknown substance and listen to strangers on TV, well, we are proven right yet again by the highest levels of government. And only the gullible would say, well, it's the Donald Trump administration and they're corrupt. No. The emails have been released. All of the documents have been released. The communications have been released by the people that they trusted, that the general public trusted blindly because they were brainwashed. I will link that link in the description below. You're welcome to go through those documents. And I will also link them on my website under the Government Documents tab. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, the consciousness continues to expand. The awakening continues. Thank you for listening as always, and I will catch you on Wednesday. Peace. Thank you for listening to American Education FM. Make sure and check out AmericanEducationFM.com for more information. Take care and God bless.